Hi, this is Misha, and it's the beginning of February 2019, and Jay and I here have the newest version of Brownells BR-601 retro rifle. And the biggest difference is, you can tell, I can't tell, but you can tell, they're going to a gray finish for the upper and the lower, which is a major improvement. You know, when small parts are black, you can swap those out, but as Chris has found out, it's really hard to find people to do good gray finish in that XM style. This is the company's clone of a 601, a Colt Model 01 AR15, later to be designated the XM16. And because you know me and I can't resist bringing it out every time I can, this is my early production Colt SP1 semi-automatic rifle. This was the very first semi-auto AR-15 sold commercially on the American market, and it's a good comparison for what we've done on the 601 here. So before we get into the details, let's see how she shoots. 601, very first shots.
Clear. Ow. Ring.
601, second try. Held open.
So first impressions for me, recoils a little bit more than the rifles I'm used to shooting, but those are also generally 2 to 3 pounds heavier, because that thing is extremely light. It balances like a carbine.
BR-601.
BRN-601.
BRN? Oh, okay.
Clear.
There's a really hot shell on my arm. BR-601. So much softer than that 308. Yeah, as Jay said, it's got a little more recoil than your more modern ARs, especially rifles that weigh 8, 9, 10 pounds with optics, but I mean, this thing is not much over 6, definitely under 7, and it's the inline straight back recoil. So it doesn't flip, it just pushes back, and even then it's still 223, guys. The only thing I'll say is it does have that springiness. See if you can hear it on camera. Just that
a little bit
in the stock, you know, that you see on some ARs, but that's just one of those things. What I do if I get one that does that, I just usually swap around buffers and springs until, you know, if you don't like it. It's just one of them things. But yeah, it's been really reliable.
Yep.
Not surprisingly, it shot fine. Brownells has been at this for a while, and let's be completely honest, guys, building a quality AR to shoot decent ammo is not exactly rocket science these days. But we know you, and you like to see shooting, and we don't blame you. So let's kind of look at this in detail, see what they got right, compare it with the Colt, and maybe see what they didn't get right, see what they got wrong, and they could improve upon. Because one thing I really do like about the way Brownells is approaching this, they're not just making a gun saying, there it is, buy it or don't. They are actively asking for customer feedback and trying to improve the product. Again, they went to the gray finish because of customer feedback. So since they ask, we're gonna let them have it. Let's start at the muzzle. Let me flip my Colt back around. The Colt here has the improved 3-prong flash hider. This was switched to around 63 to make a stronger flash hider for obvious reasons. But Brownells, and I think this is pretty neat, has went and replicated, or had replicated, more of the original 601 pattern. You see it's quite thin. It has a step down. This is sometimes called the duckbill. So that's great. On both of these guns, the barrel is threaded 1/2 by 28. It is 20 inches long. It has a 1 in 12 twist. Now, I'm not going to try to get too much into the history because we've done that, but I can't help myself, sorry. 1959, December, Colt obtains the rights for the AR-15 as well as the AR-10 from Armalite, Fairchild. In 1960, they put the original Model 601 or just Model 01 into production. These early guns had a 1 in 14 twist, non-chrome lined, pencil profile, .625 barrel. Now interestingly, these early barrels were made by Winchester for Colt. Early on, the Air Force expressed interest, but their efforts to purchase some of the Model 01s were blocked. Instead, these guns saw a lot of use during Project Agile and the South Vietnamese. Well, during this use, through this reason and that, through some testing, the twist rate was sped up from the original 1 in 14 to 1 in 12. This had pros and cons. It did have more stable bullets, especially in colder or high altitude environments, so a little better accuracy. However, you lost some of that tumbling, that wounding effect. The Brownells has a 1 in 12, as does my Colt SP1. Only very few early Colt SP1s were made with the Winchester 1 in 14 barrel. But most were 1 in 12. But this would have been something, technically the 1 in 12 was the Colt Model 602, if you want to be technical. One thing that I will have to say, if you look at my Colt, you'll see that the sight base is smooth here and on the back. What they did, they machined the flashing off. Now the very early Colt sight bases were cast, but they went to a forging and they would machine that flashing off actually really up until about 1969. If you look at the Brownells, you'll see the flashing is left. It's a small thing, but it's so visual, it's so apparent. That's one nitpick I have to say right off the bat. They've gone to so much trouble with things like this flash hider using the right duckbill, and it would be so easy for them just to and machine that flashing off. So guys, I really recommend you do that. I think it's a small thing, but it would also cost you maybe $3 to do, and I think it would really add to the aesthetic. Less so if you look at the lower sling swivel. Originally, these were held in with roll pins, and they were not rubber coated, they were just bare metal. This is rubber, it's got a rivet. Things like that don't really bug me. That you can excuse, and heck, if you really hate it, you can take the rubber off and you can swap the rivet for a roll pin. If you notice on mine here, it has a roll pin. And it has just kind of a bare metal swivel. It's got, I mean, not bare metal, but it's not rubber coated like the later ones. Small thing, and something like that I let slide. On the other hand, you see my hand guards here. They went to black hand guards in '63, but early on they would have brown fiberglass hand guards and actually brown fiberglass stock with plastic inside. but some would be painted green. So this being green, the hue is a little bright from what I'm told, but still green is good, and it's a very iconic early Air Force Project Agile thing. So they did a very good job. Of course, these are modern hand guards, modern made grip, but it's A1 style, and they did use the correct, well, nearly correct, you know, it's not a type A or B stock, this is a type D stock, but it does have the solid butt plate, although I think this is plastic. Maybe it's a hard rubber, but I think it's plastic. That should probably be rubber, but that's a minor thing. Things like that I'll let slide. Likewise, this is a standard screw with a drain hole in it. Originally, for many years, this screw would not have the drain hole. On the other hand, they did get the lower swivel right. It's held in with the roll pin and swivels. Looking at the SP1, you probably will not make it on camera, but these early grips are made just a little bit differently. They're oftentimes called skinny grips. It also has a slicker mottled surface. Stock here, you can see this is a rubber, and there's no drain hole in that screw. And likewise, there's not rubber coating on this bottom swivel, but minor things. But that's what you're here for, right? Let's look at the receivers. Now, the Brownells uses Nodak receivers. They make a great 601 clone. We've got an upper. We even have a forging mark here, which is nice. A1 sights. This uses the A1 style front push pin, which is not really captive. It has, see if I can get it out on camera. Should have put up, yeah, I can. It's just a pin. The only thing holding it in is this little spring-loaded ball detent. And you'll notice this end is dimpled. Originally, on the 601 and 602s, the rear pin would have been dimpled as well. This was more or less an artifact of manufacturing, but it also gave your bullet tip a good place to rest without sliding off for disassembly if your pins were tight. So that's not quite correct. The bolt catch isn't quite correct. This is the more modern style, which they went to around 64. For a 601 or even a 602 gun, really you would have had the early style, but that's getting nitpicky, and you can swap this out. One nice thing that they have done, they have a roll pin back here on the original gun. This roll pin held in the receiver extension, the buffer tube. But later they would go away from this around 66, 67 because it was really unnecessary. But this was a new gun at the time, so they weren't really sure about durability. Now what Nodak did, they moved the hole for the pin down just a tiny bit. So it's cosmetically there, but it doesn't intersect the threads of the tube. They also went to the early style triangle charging handle. This is another Nodak reproduction. These are great. I've had them in the past. It's a neat little small charging handle. I know where they went away from it, but this they would switch away from around 63, 64. So it's a nice correct part. Also correct, this has a slick side chrome bolt group. Now it does use the modern type cotter pin, not the early machined pin, and it uses the more squared off modern gas key and the modern firing pin, but that's really getting nitpicky. On the other hand, it has this kind of cool cross on the lower, which is correct for an original. But on the other hand, we're still using an A1 style port door. But Brownells is saying I said A2 style port door. Brownells is saying they're going to get a more early E1 or A1 style door out soon. So that's something you can easily swap out. There's just an E-clip on the back. This is marked BR-601, which is good, but it's also marked 556 NATO. Really, a gun made 60, 61, 62 would have just been marked 223, kind of predating NATO. Of course, no brass deflector forward assist, the obvious. And these do ship with Nodak reproduction waffle mags, which is an awesome touch I wasn't aware of till Jay noticed it in the box. But that's just a neat little touch that Brownells did that they absolutely didn't have to do. These are basically scaled down versions of the AR-10 mag. So for comparison, here's the Colt. You can see the cross on its lower. You can see the earlier kind of A1, E1 style port door. You can see the roll pin in the back for the tube. Now this one is an active roll pin because of when this gun was made. Now of course SP1s have this large front pin. It's a .320 versus .250. But what's fun is this is a copy of a 601 type pin. Now originally these come with a double-headed screw, but I got one of these repro pins, and it's also just basically held in with a detent. Of course it's just larger. This gun was made in early to mid 65, so we don't have the dimpled rear pin anymore. Those started to be phased out 64. This is the safety. It still has a dimpled safety. It's got a relatively modern style bolt catch. It's a little bit different. You can see it's got the divot there. The early ones didn't have this bottom nipple. Of course it has the standard charging handle we know today. This they switched over to in 64. It has a chrome bolt. Come on. Show the nice people. But all of your production SP1s had a Parkerized slick side bolt carrier. What's fun is they actually went to the Parkerized carrier in the SP1 before the US military approved it for use. The only SP1s that shipped originally with chromed carriers were the pre-production ones from 1963, which there were about 100 of. But the production ones from 64 on didn't. I'm getting back to this because I wanted to show one thing. The safety is like a modern Colt style. It has this long arm. And it has this tick mark, a very noticeable tick mark on the side. Now they did good. This doesn't have safe and fire on the right side, but it has this tick mark and it has the long. So really, that would be one of the first things I would do, would be swap this out for a more authentic, at least an A1 type safety. Maybe not go to the trouble of having the dimple, although if I could find a dimple one, better believe I would. But yeah, I would at least have an A1 safety in this myself. That was something that jumped out at me. There are other things. The mag catches were a little different. Of course, we have a slick side lower like we should. This has a modern standard rifle buffer in it. The SP1 and early guns used the Edgewater buffer. You can see that in our other videos. You know, we can go on and on about tiny details, but you gotta remember, this gun is made in 2019. Things like the furniture aren't going to be exact because the manufacturing techniques to make some of this stuff no longer exist. And a lot of the things like the dimple parts were artifacts from the fact that these were built by Armalite, who is a subdivision of Fairchild, who was an aircraft manufacturer. So they had some different ideas. So, what do I think? I'm damn impressed. These aren't an awful lot of money. They're about half the price of the Colt Reissue A1. They have a lot of things going for them. The upper and the lower are great. The charging handle's really great. Furniture is very good. The barrel itself and the flash hider are great. The only thing I can say is they don't quite have the right markings. This should have either VP or maybe MVP stamped here. It doesn't. But, you know, yeah. Aside from the small nitpicks, the things I would say could be improved on. This front sight base, let's machine this flashing off. That should be easy enough to do. Let's get the right safety in here. Let's get a more correct port door. Doesn't have to be exact for a 601, but not an A2 style. And you know, since our front pin is dimpled, let's go on and dimple our rear pin to match. That's such a small thing, but it would also be really easy to do. So those are my very unsolicited suggestions if anyone's listening. But otherwise, I think they nailed this, and I think the price point is really quite good considering this is a very specialty niche item. Well, if you're interested in more of the history, we have videos on that. We also have videos on some of the other stuff like the Brownells Retro AR10, as well as the Colt Reissue M16A1 and the XM177. We also look at the Troy. So we have plenty of other retros. Honestly, we kind of like these more than standard modern ARs because I think everyone's getting AR fatigue. Plus these old guns are so keep it simple and lightweight. So there's something to be said for simplicity. Well, if you have any questions or comments or have stories about your own Brownells retro guns or builds, because they sell parts, not just complete guns, which is nice, we'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you could, like, share, subscribe, and if you'd really like to help out, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we will catch you very soon next time.